Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Pro Peace Report. Today, I'll be interviewing Craig Pasta. He is one of the co-hosts on the Convo Couch. He recently went to Nicaragua with the other people in the Convo Couch crew to observe the recent elections going on there, and that's what we'll be talking about mostly today. So, Pasta, nice to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for doing what you're doing, Kobe. It's great to see you still running with this and making it happen. Don't know you well, but from what very little I know of you, I can say that I'm proud of you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I remember when you guys had me on after the March for Medicare for All and the complaints I had back then, and I don't think much has changed in the Democratic Party, but we can talk about that a little bit too. Before we talk about the Nicaraguan election and stuff about that, just for anybody who doesn't know you, anybody who watches this, tell them about what's your political worldview? Where do you come from? How did you get to where you are today?
That's a great question because as we've been doing this for 4 years now, the Convo Couch, it seems to keep changing and morphing, whatnot. I think a lot of us, my friend Frank Analysis over there at Frank Analysis, we're talking about maybe ditching the whole labels of leftist and right. In fact, Johnny in our crew is one who's kind of stern and says, I don't put labels on myself. I allow myself to think independently. But I can tell you that the issues that matter most to me are, number one, our foreign policy and our imperialism. And that's tied along with our elections, because elections to us, especially when it comes to my personal view, is the beacon, is the staple of an actual free society, and a society that does what the people think is best for them. So that's why I am so intrigued and interested in elections. And that's why we headed on down to the global south to see what was what.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting, that idea of no labels, because for me personally, I've always worn my label of, yeah, I'm a socialist. I think communism's good. I'm not scared of anarchism. I like to normalize these terms, but at the same time, I do understand the apprehension people have about them, because what socialism means to you is not the same as it means to me, is not the same as it means to that person. And so when you use the label, sometimes people will automatically shut down without actually listening to you and actually hearing you out about what you believe in. And so the election in Nicaragua, what drove you? Said you're interested in elections, so how did you get to going to Nicaragua to observe the election? What inspired that?
Well, it all started back in 2016 when it came to our love for elections, or trying to figure out what was when the Democratic Party said in the back room, Bruce Beaver, he said in a courtroom that the Democratic Party can go into the back room filled with cigar smoke and pick whoever they want. And that just dropped my jaw to think that they can do that. And I said right then and there, and I thought a lot of progressives would be with us, right? All the Bernie people, I thought we were going to plant our flag, learn as much about elections as we can, and make sure this crap doesn't happen again. But no, it didn't happen. But it did happen with us. We said enough is enough. No more. Let's understand the process. Let's learn the process. I don't know if you've seen any of Johnny's articles, what he's done in LA. It's amazing. Fiorella has written about some of these bills out there when it comes to Georgia. The relationship we have with the auditors, John Brakey, Garland Favorito. I know I'm throwing out names, and I like to throw out names, but these are election integrity activists from doing this for a long time all around the United States. So we just dove on in, and it's been one of our biggest, issues that we've dealt with. So when our friend Caleb Malpin hit us up and said, hey, man, you want to come to Nicaragua with us? We'll contact the foreign ministry. We jumped right at the chance to do so. Let's go. And off to Nicaragua we went.
Yeah, that's for me, 2016 was a big wake-up call when it came to elections too, because I had gone to the Democratic National Convention in protest in 2016. And we were there to get money out of politics, get rid of superdelegates, open up primaries, multi-party democracy, all sorts of things like that. And then while we were there, I got arrested on the first day in civil disobedience. We were blocking one of the entrances. Then news breaks from WikiLeaks about all of those DNC leaks emails showing the way they rigged everything behind the scenes. Debbie Schultz resigned and then got hired by Hillary Clinton 3 days later. Jordan Sheraton asking Donna Brazile about some of those WikiLeaks emails, and her just saying, oh, those are Russian hacks. Don't talk about them. You're pushing Russian disinformation. And then what was crazy to me is you had Tom Perez Harry Reid, Elizabeth Warren, all of these like establishment Democrats saying, oh yeah, I think it actually was rigged and we can't lie to people about that. And then 3 days later, they all turn around and go, oh, well, rigged is a strong word. I didn't really mean it like that. And then nothing changed in the entire party. So to me, that was really radicalizing. And Bernie, who had been screwed over in those emails, is he talking about Julian Assange today, who got arrested after publishing these emails? I mean, totally left us out to dry on this issue. So I totally respect what you guys do. And I'm actually curious to learn more from you about how you view election security in America, because it gets portrayed as if, oh, only right-wing people talk about the elections being rigged and only right-wing people have concerns about election security. But like even my representative in Maryland talked about, you know, the sketchiness of the voting machines and how, you know, who owns the voting machines is often nefarious sources or people that people don't necessarily view as accountable to anybody. So can you tell me about that? Like, how do you view American elections? Like, what are the big flaws that prevent us from being truly democratic in your mind?
You know, it's crazy that you kind of mentioned that it's only like a right-wing conspiracy theorist theory now that if you talk about elections, when, you know, the first time I got to interview Garland Favorito, he was a Tulsi supporter like me in Georgia. He was just so excited to like, wow, there's a progressives out there like you guys who are into elections and into election integrity. I said, yeah. He says, because right now it's only conservatives. It's only the Donald Trump people are into it. All the progressives have walked away, and a lot of them are playing team sports. And it was very confusing because election integrity activists are supposed to not play team sports. It's supposed to be about the integrity of the election. And in America, the elections are really, really bad. There are 3 phases to elections that I always talk about. Number 1, the registration process, how someone gets registered, that process. Number 2, the actual voting, how you show up, how you vote, the whole process, how that works. And number 3, the tabulation, how the votes are counted. I think it's a little confusing. People are saying that, you know, in America, they're trying to put it on Stalin, the quote, but I think it came from somebody else originally. It said the power lies not with those who cast votes, but with those who count votes. In other words, you know, you can have all these people voting for one person, but if the person who's counting is a fugazi person, is a nefarious person, is a dishonest person, that's how you can swing elections. So there are many ways to mess with elections, and every single aspect of our election system in America is broken. And I believe it's broken by design. That argument is still, you know, out there to be debated. But the registration process, what's in the registration polls? Right now, we have this system in America where they use COVID, the establishment that is. And I say the establishment because it's not just the Democrats. The Republican establishment, they keep quiet on these things like McConnell and Lindsey Graham. And why do they keep quiet? Because they also benefit from it. So the registration process to where they're sending out ballots, mail-in ballots to everybody on the registration polls, that's just a sign for fraud and trouble. Jimmy Carter and James Baker said in a 2014 meeting together, it was like a little delegation they had. They came out and said, by far, the area most ripe for fraud is the mail-in ballots and absentees. In fact, the old school election integrity activists dubbed it the secret ballot because you don't know where it's coming from and it doesn't have a chain of custody. And that's one of the most important words we talk about, chain of custody. And that is the actions of a ballot traveling and the security with it so that it's tracked and looked upon at all times. Well, we have no chain of custody when it comes to our elections in America. And when you have a registration process where you mail out ballots to everyone on the registration polls, you're just going to have all these extra ballots, and therefore you can do what's clustering, stuff the ballot box. The voting process itself in California, in LA, it's ridiculous. I'll talk about that in particular because it's happened in other spots at big metropolitan areas around the world, around the country. It's happened in Dallas. It's happened in New York, where you have 4, 5, 6 hour lines to vote. You know how long we clocked a voter to vote in Nicaragua? And it was at a busy place, 8 minutes and 43 seconds. Oh, wow. Johnny saw someone vote in 2 minutes. So now we have a system when you go to vote in America, it's broke. The good old US of A, and it takes you hours to vote. That's a big, big no-no. And also the fact that the machines they use, the ballot marking devices that you mark your votes on it and then you put it back into the same machine, that's nuts. That machine, if it's programmed by somebody, can add votes, can take stuff away. can destroy the ballot. It's just nuts that they put it back into a computerized machine.
And so what do you think
And
they
then
should
you
do
come
about
to
that? Is it paper ballots, do you think, would be a way to verify that? How do you avoid that problem?
Well, it's a paper ballot. What it is that in LA, when you go to sign up, you register. When you go to vote, excuse me, you go to register. You don't need your ID necessarily, which is another thing, which is just crazy. In Nicaragua, a third world country, everybody has to have ID. And, you know, that's the argument that they have with the Democrats and the establishment Democrats and the establishment Republicans, the way they're playing ping pong. If you ask for ID, it's racist. The Republicans are, how can you not have ID? You need ID for everything. So it's nuts that they have this argument. But in LA, you register, you go and sign up to vote when you show up for voting day, excuse me. You don't have to sign up. You should already be signed up. You're in the computer. A ballot will come printing out with a little QR code and the like little address and the location on the top. You then take that blank ballot and you go into a ballot marking device and you put it in. The ballot marking device recognizes it's you. You make your selections on the screen. The ballot comes out. You look at it. You check it. Then you put it back into the same machine. That is crazy. That is nuts when you're putting it back into the same computerized machine. And that's just LA. They're trying the system out everywhere. But ballot marking devices, they might have a paper trail, but also then if you're putting it back into the same machine, you're asking for trouble. The only way that would work in my mind is if you print out your ballot, it comes out, you have your choices, then you go over to another ballot box that is not computerized, that is just a box, and you put your ballot in there. But that's the thing right now, Kobe. They have all these different mechanisms and ways in which they can screw with you at the polling station. You know what I'm saying?
So I guess the question is, how do we bridge some of these divides? Because I was somebody who always used to think of mail-in ballots, for example, as a good thing, because I used to think, you know, oh, you mail out the ballot so more people can vote, because people don't wait in those 9-hour lines. They don't wait long times to vote. They want to get a mail-in ballot. But then, you know, we saw Louis DeJoy decommissioning all sorts of mailboxes. And I do think it's reasonable for people to worry, because when you put your vote in the mail, all sorts of mail workers could mess with ballots. For all you know, your ballot might just get lost in the mail on the way there. But I guess the problem is, how do we branch together? And for us, like IDs, for example, like the reason people call them racist, because it's not racist in and of itself, right? You know, it's just an ID. We need IDs to do all sorts of things. I think the reason people call it racist is because disproportionately it's Black people or people of color who can't afford the birth certificate to get the ID or whatever it is. How do we accommodate some of those concerns when it comes to mail-in ballots for, you know, people not having to wait in these long lines, or, you know, the ID? How do we meet in the middle on that issue?
Yeah. Okay. So this is great. Let's talk about this. Is a great conversation. And let's not forget, at the very end of this, we'll get to the tabulation part, because that's the juicy part too as well. So let's talk about this first of all. Well, first of all, what ID do you need? And let me just say this much. I go to North Georgia. I have an old friend and I go up there. And when we interviewed Reverend Annie Chambers, she would talk about going into these areas where there's these poor white people. And she said, she would define them as, she says, now listen, I was poor, but these people are poor. And they have the same problems going to get an ID. Literally got to travel 2 hours into town, wait several hours, try to get that ID and stuff. So it's not just about people of color. It's just poor people across the board who have hard time getting accessibility to IDs. But let's still remember it's a small number. And secondly, what ID do you need? You know what I'm saying? When it comes to the mail-in ballots, if you look at that Georgia bill, you need to put the last 4 of your Social Security or have an address that's been there for a long time to now get a mail-in ballot. That is not racist. That is not trying to disproportionately affect people to vote. And that's the angle that they're taking. Second, accessibility. We can never give up too much security to make it totally accessible. The most accessible election, in other words, if you make it completely accessible for everybody, you're going to have zero securities. There's too many openings where you can fix an election that way. You have to have a good sweet spot where you make it as accessible as you can be, but still have the securities to have an integrity of an election where the people can verify it. So by doing that, the way to make these elections most accessible is to make them expedient. The fact is, like, well, I don't want to wait 5-6 hours in a line for to vote, so I'll just get a mail-in. You shouldn't have to wait 5-6 hours to vote. You should be able to be in and out of there in 15 to 20 minutes. Clint Curtis, okay, this is a guy who runs in Florida. And this is a name you want to look at because he was one of the first persons to be approached about making a flipping device in the tabulation machines.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what he said is we should make a law. For every hour you wait past 1 hour of voting, the county has to pay you $100. So if you go in LA to go vote and you have to wait 3 hours, the county's got to cut you a $200 check. Kobe, if we had that law, how fast and expedient do you think they would make?
Oh, they would open
elections?
up more voting locations. They double it, triple the number of locations to avoid that problem.
Hire more people, have more volunteers. They have like 5-6 people running a polling place that's got to handle 10,000 people. You don't have that in Managua. You don't have that in Nicaragua. People want to be part of this process. You can get so many people involved. And the way the counties and the states are spending the money, they're wasting it. They have 1 day of training. They get 3 months of training in Nicaragua. You know what I'm saying? And not even if you open up more spots, you got to make the process expedient. But that's the thing, Kobe. They broke it on purpose. Yeah. They broke it on purpose so that you would just default and say, well, just give me a mail-in ballot. I ain't got time for this. I got to work 2 jobs. I got to babysit a dog. You know what I'm saying? That's why, that's what's going on. We should be demanding that our counties and states make these elections expedient. End of story. If they can do it in a third world country, they should be able to do it in the good old US of A.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I think conversations like this are important for people to have because of those preconceived notions people have about, like, yes, people of color are disproportionately impacted by not having an ID, but that doesn't mean that the ID law itself is in and of itself racist, or that somebody who supports something like that is racist, you know. And people who have concerns about mail-in ballots, or people who have concerns about the electronic voting machines, like they're realistic concerns. It's not just voter suppression tactics. Like, I get why people think it is because, oh, they don't want you to be able to vote by mail. They want to make it harder. But then nobody's accommodating, like you said, the 5-hour wait time in certain lines. So clearly there's like a lot more nuance to this conversation than people are willing to give it. And in the primaries, you know, I have a problem personally with the fact that primaries happen over the course of like 5 months, because for me in Maryland, by the time it got to our election, there was no chance for Bernie to win the primary. So my vote in the primary felt meaningless because Bernie was already going to lose. Biden already had enough delegates, basically. You know, I wish we had one primary election day, just so it's like national election day, primary election day across the country, because they want those states at the very beginning of the process to be able to dictate what happens from then on out. Because if you win the first 4 states, then the media narrative becomes, oh, you know, Biden's already won every state so far. How could anybody possibly come back at this point? So then if you live in a later state, you just think, oh, it's not worth it. And then, like you said, we can just go in a back room and smoke cigars and pick a candidate like the old days. I mean, they're admitting
in the courtroom. They said that in the federal courtroom.
I think I signed on to that class action lawsuit. So to me, it's like, I've donated money to the Bernie Sanders campaign. I am poor. I did not have the money that I donated to the Bernie Sanders campaign. And for them to just admit, yeah, if we wanted to, we can rig primaries. That's not a problem. It's like, oh my gosh.
Kobe, like, and the thing is that I am so disappointed in the progressives at that point, the way they just walked away from the whole thing. You know what the conservatives are doing? About 4 months ago, I jumped on to a seminar of sorts where they were having all the right-wing Trumpers speak. Patrick Burns, the pillow guy, Javon Hunt and Pulitzer, all these people who are getting involved in election integrity, which is kind of funny because as some of us progressives have been doing this for a while, we gave them the old Bruce Willis line, welcome to the party, pal. We've been here for a long time, because that's the thing. It was mostly progressives into election integrity, especially from what we saw in the primaries, what the establishment was doing to us. But at the end of this seminar, they literally had 12 classrooms. You can break it down. Who wants to learn more about the registration process? Who wants to learn more about the voting process? Who wants to understand how to request a FOIA request so you can get information? Who wants to learn about tabulation machines? You know what I'm saying? And they would go into classrooms to seminars and learn about this shit. This is something the progressives should have done 4 years ago, that they walked away, they got dirt kicked in their face, and they said, oh, well, I guess I'll take it. You got to have some respect for these Trumpers or patriots or whatever you want to call them, because they're like, bullshit, this is not happening again. And when you see these laws coming out, a lot of people think it's a bunch of Republicans, you know, giving suppression laws. No, the Republican establishment, they're closing their mouth and saving face, because you got these smaller, like, politicians within the state, the state congressions going, all right, we're making these laws. What laws? And those Republicans are just playing along because they understand they kept quiet about this shit because it played to their favor too. So they're trying to save face. So this is the difference between what's going on with them and the difference with what should have been going on with us. We should have been leading the way. That's why Bernie Sanders is so disappointing, because a lot of the stuff Bernie Sanders was pushing for after he dropped out, early counting, which is just a way to fix an election, which is awful. The whole shit he talked about, the mail-in ballots, it's just awful. They left us high and dry. And here's the thing. If we don't stand up and speak for this stuff, they're going to continue to use it on the grassroots candidates, Kobe, that we want to get elected.
Do you think there's any scenario where mail-in ballots could be not like that? Like in Maryland, for example, I don't think we have to put our mail-in ballot in the mail. I think there's like a election voting thing that we put it in, like
the
a
drop boxes, which should be eliminated.
Sort.
They should be eliminated. The mail is much more safer than the drop boxes. We should add some tracking to that. You notice how when you order something from Amazon or you order some food, you got the little car going and you can see exactly where that person is, you know what I'm saying, on your tracking device. Same thing should be done when it comes to mail-in ballots. Number one, it should only be for people who request it. Number two, it should only be limited to people who are handicapped, veterans that can't get there, active military personnel. So it should be limited, right? That's the way it's done. So now you have it tracking, you have it limited. The majority of voting still should be done in a voting center where we can keep the chain of custody intact. Because once you lose that chain of custody, you're going to have all sides yelling and screaming. The ballots, they left the place. Remember what happened on election night? All of a sudden, these vans started showing up with all these ballots that put Joe Biden over the top. Well, there's no paperwork on who picked them up. There's no paperwork on where they came from. This is what the election integrity activists are finding now in Georgia. In one county, 80%, close to, it was like 78 to 80% of the paperwork of the mail-in ballots picked up in these drop boxes out in the middle of nowhere with no custody, with no chain of custody, with no camera, don't have paperwork on it, which should be illegal. You know what I'm saying? So the only way we make the mail-in right is, number one, it's got to be by request only, and it's got to be limited to who can request it. You know what I'm saying?
And I think something like
at the very least, we shouldn't be sending it out to everybody on the voter registration poll.
I think something like chain of custody would be a good way to kind of eliminate some of those concerns too, because like I remember I watched some of your stream when you were in Nicaragua, and I saw how in the voting booth there were election observers from all of the different parties who were there in the room watching how it was done. And so if you had those mail-in ballot boxes that we were talking about, if you had people from all the parties involved being the ones who are transferring it from one location to another, you can't have one party say that the other one was stuffing the box or anything like that. If both parties or multiple parties, I want it to be a multi-party system, if everybody has a representative doing the moving from one location to another, representatives from all the parties counting the ballots, the paper ballots in the room, instead of a machine where, I mean, I remember seeing in 2012, people would click on one of the candidates and then the vote would automatically accidentally glitch over to the other one on some of the machines. And they called it just a glitch. But like when things like that happen, it creates so much distrust. I don't think it's unreasonable for people to want a more trustworthy system. I think the big problem that happened with the divide we have on this is that I think a lot of people, a lot of liberals, and I don't like to call liberals the left, a lot of the people in the Democratic Party, they distrusted the Trumpers shouting about the election because they saw it as only being connected to Trump. They saw it as only being connected to the 2012 or 2020 election. And when they stormed the Capitol on January 6th, you know, because they were only doing it in terms of this one election, it wasn't like their broad demand was, let's change the whole election systems entirely. It seemed so focused on Trump that it made it so that people, liberals or even leftists who might have been sympathetic to their cause, well, when it's attached to Trump, they're not sympathetic to it. But if we could actually have a movement of people, and that's why I like Democracy Spring so much in 2016, and this is why it fell apart actually, is because they endorsed Hillary Clinton, Democracy Spring. And the organization split entirely in half because half of us were like, what the heck? Like, this is about a nonpartisan movement to make democracy in America. And you're endorsing the person who just rigged the primary? Like, so I feel like when we're doing these things about fixing the democracy, we really need to find a way to bring together all of our various factions who have all of our differences. But because election integrity, that impacts all of us. That's a nonpartisan issue. Gerrymandering, Democrats and Republicans both gerrymander. I live in Maryland. We have some of the craziest shaped districts in the country. And so it's like too many people think of these things in partisan ways, and we need to find a way to bring it together because elections are something that's nonpartisan.
Well, let me tell you about a story about January 6th. I was about 500 yards from the steps of the Capitol. There was this little mini stage out there, which a couple people jumped up on. And I jumped up on there, and I had a camera, and we were dealing with the fact that we couldn't stream because they were jamming the signals. Like, we couldn't do our job. They didn't want cameras out there. So at this moment, we had made a decision to switch off the live stream and just start filming and put it out later. And there was a gentleman there with a Make America Great hat on, whatnot, and he saw me. He goes, "What are you? Your media?" And he can see my tag hanging. I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "What outlet?" I'm from the Convo Couch. He goes, "What's that?" I said, "Well, we're an independent media group, and we call ourselves common sense leftists who specialize in election integrity." He goes, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, we got started with election integrity in 2016 when Bernie Sanders got screwed in the primary." And he looked me in the eye. He goes, "You know something? We were silent about that then, and I apologize because we should have said something then when it was so damn obvious, and we'll never let that happen again." And I was just blown away. I just like, wow, like, holy shit. And I think a lot of people realized it then too as well. And also too, Kobe, the 2020 election was kind of a little bit different than the other ones. They had changed laws. Election officials, Secretary of States have changed laws, sometimes unconstitutionally because of the COVID, to make this mail-in system work for them. But some of us had already known in 2016 how they can use the mail-in system to cheat people. I mean, they would use it in a different way in 2016. What was happening in 2016 is that mysteriously people's registrations in California and LA were changed from day of voting, going inside a polling place and vote, to mail-in voting. So when they went in to go vote, they say, "Oh, you registered for a mail-in." Like, no, we did not. So they were given a provisional. So the ballot was thrown out. So that, some people got caught on that. I can talk a little bit more about that another day and stuff, but people got their ass busted. But we had seen the way the establishment had used the mail-in ballots to cheat. I mean, it goes all the way back to the John Kennedy, Gerald Nixon election. You know what I'm saying?
What's the proof? Because I'm really curious, like, how do we know for sure that, like, cheating has happened? Like, do we know people stuffed the boxes? Like, what evidence do we rely on that says that? Because I see how the suspicion could be there, but what is the key thing that we can see that they've done?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you how it does in 2016, and I'll compare it to what happened in 2020. Because the thing is that, once again, I can't give you the fingerprints on the gun and the bullet because they won't let me look at the gun. In 2020, what happened is we saw what's called mathematical anomalies, mathematical impossibilities, where Joe Biden got 121,000 votes to none of Trump. That's a mathematical impossibility. What that does is that pinpoints the area where we can then go in and look at the ballots and try to verify it. But that's the problem. They don't let you have audits. The whole game is get the votes in the machine, get them through, close everything up. You got 22 months by federal law, which you have to hold on to all election paperwork, electronic devices. Everything's going to be held for 22 months. So the game is get the votes in, get them counted, lock everything up, tie everything up in the courts until after the 22 months, and then destroy everything. So when it comes to the 2020 election, we have mathematical impossibility after mathematical impossibility, where it happened in Wisconsin, it happened in Michigan, it happened in Georgia, it happened in Pennsylvania. And then we also have signs in Arizona where a lot of people saw the mechanism of flipping. There was a whistleblower who sent something out. So what we do is we look at what we call pattern analysis, voting analysis. Do you remember the way the primary in 2020 happened, Kobe, where, like, let's say for Texas, with 60, I'm going to do my best Brian Williams impression. With 61% of the vote in, we are now calling Texas for Joe Biden. Joe Biden will take Texas at the primary and put a nail in the coffin of Bernie Sanders. Well, why do they call that at 61%? We're all going, hey, there are people in line. There's 60% of the vote in. We still have 40% to come. Can he win? What they'll say is, well, we have enough sample size of voting where we know that the pattern is set, where it won't go out and it will be impossible for Bernie Sanders to catch Joe Biden. That's what they say when it's in their favor. And the 2020 election, Trump had those same leads in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, but they didn't call it. Why? Because they had something up their sleeve where they can stuff the ballot box, and all of a sudden these numbers come and they're crazy. Then we go back and start looking. So we start talking to election integrity activists where they're putting out press conferences and releases. They're like, listen, dude, we just went over these images that we got in Georgia where they looked at the ballot images, which is what's counted. Your ballot is taken is a picture is taken by the machine of the ballot, and that picture image is counted. So they looked at the ballot images, and then they tried to match them up to the tallies, and they were way off. They're like, these are not matched up. Somebody reported the tallies wrong. We don't know who, but we know right here. And as we listen to these election integrity activists that will never get on MSNBC, they'll never get on CNN, they won't even get on Fox. They're seeing a lack of paperwork, missing paperwork, tallies things wrong. So we know, we understand. But that's the problem, Kobe. You cannot audit these elections. That's why the Arizona audit, which people called fraud, they said was bullshit, it was so important. Even though they used a bunch of Republican goons that were looking for bamboo paper in the ballots itself, you know what I'm saying? And there's so much to learn in these elections. I don't want to lose people by saying bamboo paper, but they were looking for that kind of shit. You know what I'm saying? What they did was they just looked for inaccuracies. It wasn't about removing Biden and putting Trump in and decertifying the election. It was just finding the inaccuracies and making sure that you fix the election system for the future. But there are so many inaccuracies in that 2020 election where you're like, oh my God, this is like impossible. This is impossible.
You'd think we would just put audits like automatically to like, because we want people to trust. I feel like too often the media, they don't want to give voice to people that they claim are conspiracy theorists or spreading misinformation about elections. And I'm sure there are people who do that, but at the same time, if you don't ease people's concerns, if you don't do everything possible to make sure that people trust the election, and then you're also censoring the people who have concerns, those people who have concerns are going to not trust you 10 times more because now you're not letting them raise their concerns and refuting them. And if we don't have audits, we don't have paper ballots. If in Iowa, in the primary, I think Pete Buttigieg was directly connected to that shadow app where some of that vote counting happened on, and then he won more delegates, but Bernie won more votes. And it's like, that's kind of suspicious. He declared victory before it was even over. I mean, we shouldn't have people who are connected to the voting machines at all business-wise. Like a candidate, I think Mitt Romney in 2012 had some financial ties to some of the voting machines too that people raised concerns about. It's like, when you have conflicts of interest like that, you don't have to go as far as thinking the conspiracy actually happened, but you can see why people do because there's no evidence it didn't. You can't refute people who have concerns about the elections. And in 2016, they told us they can rig the primary. So it's like,
yeah.
Let's switch to Nicaragua a little bit though, because we've talked a lot about our elections. Tell me about the Nicaraguan election, like your whole experience there. How was the time there? Like, what did you do?
Truly amazing. You know, I've made these tweets before that, you know, if we had the same voting system as Nicaragua, 95% of the Congress wouldn't even be there, and we wouldn't have to be worried about the two donkeys jockeying up top because we'd have a real system. We'd have a real democracy. And for all those patriots out there that say socialism is bad, communism's bad, well, I just went to a socialist country that has way more democracy and way more freedom of choice than Americans do. And it was just an amazing experience from beginning to end. We actually went to Bilwi to watch the whole elections over there, which is in the northeast Caribbean coast of the country. So we were in Managua, and we actually took a small plane to go over to that region right now, and that's the autonomous zone, where they actually have their own judges, their own law, whatnot over there, and the federal government comes into a system with infrastructure, roads, and disasters. So it's kind of amazing because, you know, people talk about states' rights and this and that, and they kind of have that in Nicaragua. It's amazing. But the election process from beginning to end, everything from the registration, you have to have ID. There's no mail-in voting. There's no drop boxes out in the middle of nowhere. It's 1 day of voting. It's expedient as can be. You get in, you show your ID. You then go to your junta, which is a room inside of a polling place, right? And we're talking about in this one, the first polling place we went to, I'd say there was 20 juntas. So there's three to five election workers per junta. There's got to be 100 workers in there, right? From everybody who signs people up. We have 5 people in our fucking polling places, 5, maybe 10. They have 100. Everybody's been trained for months. You go to your junta, you wait in line. If there's a line, if not, you go on in. They look at your ID. Now, they have exactly where you're supposed to be, right? And this is important right now because a lot of people think with the LA system, with the vote center, where you can go wherever you want to vote is a good thing. It's not for audit purposes. And a lot of election integrity activists in California keep saying we need to get back to where you have to go to your precinct because therefore you can verify, track, and audit the vote. If you do it anywhere, it's impossible to audit a vote. You know what I'm saying? It's just a scrambled clusterfuck. But in Nicaragua, they go right in. They show their ID again. The person has a paper with all the IDs. Johnny's got a great video on this. If you check out Johnny's Instagram, he's got a little clip of it. We have it on our YouTube in the videos when we live stream that day. In the piece of paper, Kobe, they'll have a picture of your face and your ID to match. Oh, so this is Kobe. He's coming to vote. Go ahead. They'll then give you a ballot right there. You take that ballot to the spot in a little small booth. You mark it off. You fold it up. You put it in the ballot box. Then you go over to the table, and this is something that conservatives will love. They'll put a piece of black ink. They'll put some black ink on your right thumb, I believe it is. And that black ink won't wear off for 3 days. So guess what? You can't double vote. Then you leave the room. The voting process is with all the parties in the room. So it is the counting process. Then they'll count the ballots there together in those rooms. They'll match up all the juntas together. They'll take that to the municipal level where they'll do the adding up of all the votes again as well from the municipal. Then they'll take it to one of the 8 regions, do all the adding up of the votes in the 8 regions, and then they'll take it to Managua for the final report over there. So it's every step of the way. But the great thing is nobody was thrown out of the rooms. Remember what they were doing to the Republicans in 2020? They were putting papers on the wall so they couldn't see. We even had a video of one guy going, I want all the Republicans out of the room now. That doesn't happen. They're all present there, and we would check, what's your ID? Let me see. Oh, you're a Sandinista. Oh, you're one of the opposition party. Oh, you're the other opposition party. So the whole process right there has integrity. All the parties are in the room when they vote. All the parties are in the room when they count. So there's no questions asked. That's why nobody challenged this election last time, because it is solid, it is fair, and it's expedient. If we want our elections to be accessible, that's the thing we got to concentrate on most. Get people in and out. Get them in and out. Get them in and out, like quick. And then that's the best thing we can do for our elections, because then everybody will participate because it won't be a fucking chore. Excuse me for cursing.
No, it's okay. You can curse all you want on this show. But I want to pull up a tweet here because I think it kind of talks a little bit about the differences in how people in Nicaragua feel about their country and the differences of how Americans feel. I think it's a pretty clear distinction here. So Nicaragua turnout 2020, 62%, or U.S. voter turnout was 62%. Nicaragua voter turnout was 65%. And that's even with some of the opposition calling for boycotts of the election. So it didn't happen as much as it happens in America on a normal basis. Percent of the country that feels it's moving in the right direction. U.S. is 29%. Nicaragua, 64%. Global rank gender gap index. U.S. 51st place. Nicaragua, 5th place in terms of the gender gap. And so you just see, in general, there's a lot more trust in the Nicaraguan government, the Sandinista government. But then I also want to talk about, because we have to talk about the elephant in the room, right? What the U.S. and the sanctions and everything that's happening on that. So I have an interesting article, and I think it both talks about some of the concerns, and then I have some interesting hypocrisy that we can connect it to how our concerns about Nicaragua's government could apply to the U.S. just the same. Like it's not a reason to call them not a democracy unless you're saying America's not a democracy. And so let me pull up this other article we have here. Hang on.
And by the way, while you're pulling up that article, it's crazy those numbers you talked about. The 62% was with mail-in ballots shotgunned out to almost everybody on the voter rolls in major metropolitan areas. So the fact that they only got, and a lot of people believe those votes weren't votes. I sure do. You know what I'm saying? But it's kind of crazy that they had 65%, no mail-in ballots. You had to show up. And let me tell you something, you have to show up if you're handicapped. That was one of the most amazing things, seeing people in wheelchairs, in rockers. Now, when you get there and you're handicapped, they make it much more accessible. There's a video of people carrying a wheelchaired woman up the stairs and putting her in a junta. But, you know, when you see the pride and the responsibility, it's a gift to vote. You know what I'm saying? It's awesome. And they take it serious there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely need way more voting locations so that, like you said, we can have it so that you can be in and out. And it shouldn't be a 3-hour wait time where they lock the door if you're at the end of the line, like you saw in some of the primaries. But let's talk about this article. So I don't want to read all of it, but there are specific details that I think are very relevant to the U.S. But so we'll start with some of their criticisms. The Sandinista government of Ortega, a former Marxist guerrilla who has served as president since 2007, has passed laws that stifle free speech, arrested journalists and civic leaders, and quelled political dissent. Well, we have Julian Assange, journalist who's currently in jail. You know, the U.S. trying to bring him here, charge him with 170 years in prison, quelled political dissent. The Democrats sue third parties off the ballot. Both parties, you know, try to raise voter suppression laws that keep third parties out. But it goes on. There's a key point I wanted to get to here. So there was a law that they passed that they claimed, let's see, where is it? So apart from the 2020 law that defines traitors in general terms, and they were defining traitors as people who wanted to violate the sovereignty of Nicaragua, because I know that there are concerns about U.S.-funded NGOs going in, trying to spark revolution in the country, but a capitalist revolution to overthrow the socialist government. But yeah, I think it's interesting here because you see, so apart from the 2020 law that defines traitors in general terms, other recent laws that have been criticized for impeding fair elections include one that requires people who receive funding or objects of value from abroad to register as foreign agents. Well, you know, anybody who works for Russia Today in America is considered a foreign agent. There was a law passed in 2016 because of the WikiLeaks emails that came out and the Russian disinformation, the interference in our elections that they claimed. There's a law that says if you work for them, you are a foreign agent in America too. So it's not like this is without precedent. And then here's another one that criminalizes the dissemination of false information that produces alarm, fear, and distress in the population. Well, don't we hear people talking about censoring people on COVID, or don't we hear about censoring dissent on all sorts of issues where you're going to raise alarm and fear of and distress in the population? And Facebook and Twitter were censoring people, Sandinista supporters in Nicaragua, taking their accounts down, calling them government bots, and they were real people. So my whole point is, even if there might be human rights concerns in Nicaragua, because no country's perfect, the things that we accuse them of are the same things that we do. And so to me, it's just like, it's just so hypocritical. And like, what right do we have to tell them what to do with their country if we don't want them telling us what to do with our country? So what was your experience like there, hearing about some of these human rights concerns, and how did you feel about it? Like, what's your whole take on the matter?
Well, I just want to highlight your last sentence, what you said over there before, not this last sentence, but for the last paragraph. Like, what right do we have them to tell them what to do when it's their country and they should do what they want to do? They should have their own sovereignty. And that is the exclamation point right over there. And let's be honest, we know what this is about. This is about Russia having a foothold in South and Central America. America doesn't want it. It's also about resource extraction and corporations being able to benefit off their natural resources like they do in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. I mean, for one point, before I was a vegan, I didn't eat bananas for years because I knew what the UFC, which was the United Fruit Company, which eventually became Chiquita, what they did, the way they took the banana away from the people when they nationalized that beautiful crop to build themselves roads, education, and give themselves health care. So, I mean, yeah, when you're talking about that, number one, we shouldn't be over there at all meddling. And the Sandinista government has always been a thorn in the side of the military-industrial complex. And the imperialists who really run this country, it's the imperialists, whether it be Joe Biden or Donald Trump, they're the same when it comes to their foreign policy in the global South. It's just bullshit. And as far as the whole funding thing is concerned, can you imagine, Kobe, if we had a candidate running in the United States that was funded by Iran and North Korea? Okay,
Oh, we know what
the
to say.
military-industrial complex and the shit libs and the conservatives would flip their lid. It wouldn't be able to happen. So what Ortega did was make that same law. It's very similar to the law they made in Hong Kong, the Chinese did. And now if you're going to take money from these groups like the NED, which is very present, Ben Norton has done great work on this stuff. We were able to talk to Ben Norton. This is his area. This is his wheelhouse, where they showed the receipts. You can't be taking money from these NGOs that are all about imperialism, whether it be the NED, the OAS, all these fucking groups. They want to overturn the country. And what happened in 2018, it was a real insurrection. Unlike the bullshit insurrection that we had over here, which it wasn't an insurrection. I was there. If Trumpers wanted to fucking take the Capitol, we would have saw some weapons. We didn't see one freaking weapons, and they still might be hunkered down in there today. You know what I'm saying? These survival guys over there. So we know it's bullshit. In their insurrection that was funded by Western imperialism, people died. Close to 100 people died. Cops were killed. Sandinistas were killed. Left wing, right wing is a different thing when it comes to Latin America and the United States. I'll call myself a Latin American leftist because that's what I'm more about. I'm all about the economics and the resources that they're trying to keep. But it's hypocrisy at its finest. What Daniel Ortega did, he didn't jail one candidate. This is what they reclassified them. This is the whole thing what they do in America now. They reclassify it. They reclassify what vaccine means. They reclassify what it means to a virus. You know what I'm saying? Well, they're reclassifying what it means to be a candidate by calling them a pre-candidate. Hey, man, you or I
they hadn't announced yet. They hadn't announced their
States.
candidacy.
What's that?
They hadn't announced their candidacy yet. None of them were officially candidates.
No. So you're a pre-candidate to be the United States president. I'll be the pre-candidate to be the vice president. If they jailed us, would they say they're jailing their opposition and their competition? That's the craziness about that. But they also know, Americans know, the imperialists know, the predator class know that Americans don't read into the nuance of things. They read the headlines. So when I was doing the interview with the Business Insider, the guy was saying, well, he jailed his competition. And I said, no, that's not true. You know that. I'm like, do you know anybody of the people's names who were jailed? No. It's like they don't even know who they're talking about, but they just throw that out there, and the American people buy it. They swallow it. He jailed his opposition. That's why he got 75% of his vote. No, none of them were registered. They called themselves pre-candidate, which is BS. And let me tell you something. The reason why he won in a landslide is because they tried and attempted this 2018 coup. We've met people who are oppositions who don't like Daniel Ortega. We met a taxi driver who doesn't like it. But you know what they say? I'm not crazy about Daniel Ortega. I think he's holding on to power too long. But at the end of the day, the Americans shouldn't be involved in themselves in their business. They should get the fuck out. And that's what we should do, is get the fuck out.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating thing, because like I'm getting my master's degree right now in human rights studies. So I'm kind of hearing what the international system and what the Western world thinks of when they talk about sanctions and human rights. And to me, it's like sometimes there are valid human rights concerns, but they tie it so much to sanctions and so much to coercing the country to do what we want them to do that you end up completely erasing the human rights concerns. You're not talking about the human rights concerns. You're basically using it as a wedge against that country. And that's what's so frustrating is like, because then people who might have agreed with you about a human rights concern are going to be like, no, you're trying to interfere with my country's elections. You're trying to overthrow my government, and I don't want you to do that. And like, so I wanted to pull up Ro Khanna's
I was just about to mention him.
I got the Ro Khanna tweet, and then I have kind of an explanation of these sanctions are going to impact like half of the country. Like it's not targeted sanctions, because you're going to see Ro Khanna tries to pretend like they are targeted sanctions, but they are much more broad.
That's a new avenue, Kobe, right? It's targeted sanctions. The human rights issues is sanctions as a whole. If you really cared about human rights issues, you would care about the sanctions, because the sanctions hurt the people, the most vulnerable people, the poor people. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we have the Ro Khanna tweet here, so I'll just read it, his statement. I firmly oppose broad-based economic sanctions that indiscriminately harm millions of innocent civilians. While I voted in favor of targeted sanctions on Maduro and Venezuelan officials, I led over a dozen of my colleagues in criticizing the Trump administration's overbroad economic sanctions, and again joined a growing number that condemned them in August. I was among the 80 House members who called on President Biden to seek an end to the embargo against Cuba, petition backed by 184 countries, including all of the NATO allies. It is wrong and counterproductive for U.S. policy to inflict harm on innocent families due to the actions of their government. So I'm not going to read it all. It's kind of a long statement, but this connects perfectly to, now we'll see the refutation. So Ro Khanna says, I don't support overbroad sanctions. Is that true? Is the Renaissance Act not an overbroad sanction? Here's the video.
Basically, then, the United States, or at least this proposed bill, is claiming to promote democracy in the country, but instead what they're really doing is they're doing the exact opposite. They're preventing people, or they're trying to prevent people from voting their will for who they want as a leader in the country. So we're asking, this is very important, I think, that we need to stop, we need to ask the U.S. to stop interfering in all these different countries, Nicaragua being one, but there are others. As Jill was talking about the sanctions, we've got, 39 countries that are sanctioned right now. We don't want this to pass in Nicaragua. The capitalist system that we're operating under, that is really what's behind this, because that system wants to be able to come in, open up the markets in Nicaragua, and plunder the country, to use people, pay them low wages, and plunder all of their resources, as they have done in so many other places around the world. Please call and ask Congress to oppose the Renaissance Act. Thank you.
So I want to get your comment on that, and then I have another half of this clip that actually, I thought that was the one that explained all the people that it's on. We'll see in the next one she explains who's impacted by it. But how do you feel about what she said there, that the ulterior motive behind these sanctions is to basically overthrow the socialist government, have in place a capitalist puppet, and allow multinational corporations to come in and exploit their resources? How do you feel about that?
Well, it should be crony capitalism, right? This is the part where me and Fiorella kind of like split hairs a little bit. She believes that capitalism is one of the best, is like a form of the imperialism, where I think it's the imperialism using the form of capitalism. What came first, the chicken or the egg, right? And it's crony capitalism. It's not like me and you now. It's like, oh, we have a capitalist system. Well, me and Kobe are going to go open up a business where we're going to sell, vegan food on the side of the street. It's not going to happen that. It's only the top big corporations, which I believe it's elitism is the biggest problem, right? It's about the predator class. They're going to go in there and they're going to rape the country blind. And that's what it's all about. It's not about like human rights. It's not about having a fair way, whatnot. And in fact, there are businesses in Nicaragua where individuals make money. You know what I'm saying? So there's a form of capitalism there is, but they have social entities when it comes to their healthcare, when it comes to their education, to make that people have a bottom line standard of living, which is like human. You know what I'm saying? Like not what we have in the United States, where we see 60,000 people in Los Angeles who homeless. It's inhuman. It's disgusting the way they live. So yeah, I mean, it's always this kind of secret door, the secret code. And when you have leftists, quote leftists like Ro Khanna saying they want targeted sanctions, that's bullshit. That's cryptic as can be. That's an imperialist mentality. There are no such thing as targeted sanctions. Mike Gravel said it before, and I'll say it again. Sanctions are an act of war, and who do they affect most? The most vulnerable and the most poor people there as well. So that's why it just pisses me off that we see so many people silent right now. Somebody said to me the other day, I said, are you mad about Tulsi Gabbard's comment on Kyle Rittenhouse and the whole situation? I said, no. I'm mad at her for her silence and not saying anything about Nicaragua and these sanctions. Because as I'm leaving there, I'm getting teared up thinking that, wow, a lot of these people who are barely just holding on, and don't get me wrong, for the last 15 years, the Sandinista government, their level has been raised up. They have a fighting chance now. They're eliminating extreme poverty. They're building roads, electricity, making sure people can eat. But some of them are going to die because of these sanctions, because America's grip and their stranglehold can make the poor people suffer. So when she's speaking this word out there, she's speaking the truth. These sanctions are not about, there's no such thing as a targeted sanction. Ro Khanna needs to target his stupid fucking head and smack it across the head, because he's lying. And he's been like this when it comes to Venezuela. He's an imperialist through and through. And that's what we have to realize, that we have nothing but imperialists in our Congress. And for the squad who just voted against it, it's bullshit. They haven't made tweets. They haven't called press conferences. They haven't had rallies in the street. They voted for that because they knew it was safe. They can vote it, not say anything, and just move on. Our Congress, our government is corrupt. They're filled with imperialists, and we need to get rid of all of them.
And it's interesting that Ro Khanna connects it to the Venezuela one, because I remember very specifically when John Bolton was in the Defense Department, and he said, we want their oil. We want U.S. oil companies to be able to go in and profit off of their oil. And what does Venezuela use their oil for? Their government nationalized the oil company so that they could use it for social programs, so that they could use it for the homeless and feeding the hungry. And now I think that they've seen, like, they're getting like 1% of the money that they were getting before the sanctions on the country. AOC had said, we want to, or she said, I defer to leadership. I defer to Nancy Pelosi's leadership.
Caucus leadership. Yeah.
So she's not actually talking about the connection of U.S. imperialism there at all. None of the squad are. That's the elephant in the room that nobody in Congress or anywhere, I don't see any media other than the small little independent media that we have, the little fraction of the internet that we are. And I see it talked about in my classroom, we talk about imperialism. In my master's degree program, we talk about imperialism. So people clearly know about it, but you don't get any discussion about it publicly. And so now I'm going to show the second clip of that same woman from before. And this is where she talks about all of the different groups of people in Nicaragua who these sanctions are going to impact, because it's not just targeted to the leadership.
The Renacer Act, which already passed the U.S. Senate, and it passed one committee in the U.S. House of Representatives, but it has not passed the second committee. And so we still have a chance to beat this thing, okay? And that's what we're trying to do here. H.R. 2946 is an act or a bill which supposedly is promoting democracy in Nicaragua. That is a total lie. I call BS on that one. So what the Renacer Act is really doing is, if it passes, it will impose even more restrictions on any international aid from any international financial institution on the country. And the RICA Act already did great damage. And second, it is targeting sanctions. In other words, it at least allows the president to put sanctions on any individuals in the country who are, and I'm going to read some of these, if they work for the government, if they are a member of the FSLN. Now, there are 2 million or more registered members of the FSLN in a country of 6.3 million people, and that includes the kids, okay? They could also target the families of any party members, regardless of whether they're in the FSLN or not. It also applies to anybody who's in the National Police, the Armed Forces, or the Supreme Electoral Council. So in other words, over half the country could be liable for these sanctions. And so what that does is it is targeting only one side of the political spectrum in Nicaragua, and it happens to be the side that is the most popular in the country, because the FSLN is broadly supported because of the good that they have been doing since 2007 when they came back into power.
I mean, that's wild. So that's impacting sanctions on basically half the country, 50% of the country. And you have Ro Khanna saying that he opposes those types of broad-based economic sanctions. I mean, it's like they don't even read the counter argument. It's like they are gaslighting us. They do read it. I'm sure they're aware of it. They're Congress members. They know what we're saying. They know what the critique is. They censor it. Nobody knows that this is what's happening. So, I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, they know that the American people are consumed and not paying attention to this, so therefore they can get away with it. You know, I don't want to say that the American people are stupid and they don't know what's going on. They're more consumed, right? They're consumed with their work. They got 2 jobs. They're consumed with trying to put food on the table. They're consumed with trying to keep a roof over their head. And then when they're not consumed with that, you know what I'm saying, they're so beat down that they get consumed with reality TV or the Kardashians or who wants to be, you know, the next great singer or whatever show is on. So they're consumed all in all. And then you have the mainstream media who doesn't talk about these things in depth, who doesn't show the reality of these sanctions. And that's why it's so important to keep doing what you're doing, Kobe, and for us to keep doing what we're doing. Because like you said, it's that small piece of like, you know, internet people or in social media or whatever we are independent journalists that are cut out that are talking about that stuff. That's why it's so important for us to continue to tell these truths. But he can get away with that because the people aren't paying attention. And that's why I'm so disappointed in the squad. That's why I'm so disappointed in Tulsi. And I don't care if she's not in Congress anymore. She was supposed to be the anti-regime change candidate. Will stand up, speak up, and say something. You got 1 million followers. AOC has got 3 million. Can you imagine if she was the candidate that we chose, that we wanted to be there? She'd be screaming at the rooftops about this, because this isn't just about starving people out. This is about the continued American imperialism, which is also draining resources at home. Instead of spending all this money on weaponry and on the NED and all these little PSYOP actions to go in there and try to overturn the government, why don't we spend it on the roads back at home? Why don't we spend it on feeding homeless people? Why don't we spend it on housing home people? Why don't we spend it on education? That is the issue right here. And I believe that woman's name was Barbara, right? Did it say Barbara underneath or no? Or did she have a name?
I'm not sure. I don't remember. It was from Saskatchewan News.
Yeah, it was Saskatchewan News, which is Camilla Escalante from Camilla Press. She used to work for Telesur. Now she's doing her own thing based out of Bolivia. But that was Barbara. I believe it was Barbara. She went to Bilby with us. There was 10 of us that went to Bilby. She actually traveled with us on the whole process. And you know what's really great when you get with those people, though, those anti-imperialists who know that stuff? They see the Convo Couch and they see us asking questions. They see the stuff we talk about. They start coming to us to ask us questions about elections. We go to ask them questions about imperialism. So now we're educating each other as a group to get this information out there. That's the beauty about going to Nicaragua with these people. And it's also the beauty about what we do is that we can plug in with them, understanding the vessel to keep imperialism in play is the hypocrisy and the crookedness of our elections. And if we fix it, Kobe, if we could fix it, we can change things. We can change everything. Whatever issue you're into, if you're a green advocate, if you're for homeless people, if you're for veterans, if we fix our elections, we can get a populist representation for the people and not for the corporations and the imperialists, in which that lady was speaking out against.
I mean, that's a big reason why I wanted to get my master's degree in human rights studies in Europe, is because I didn't want to learn it in the US, because I knew if I learned it in the US, I'd be getting only the US human rights perspective on it. But I wanted to understand, because I know that there are valid human rights concerns around the world, but I wanted to know how they are abusing that system of human rights for imperialist reasons. So I wanted to know the language that they use. I wanted to read the international treaties that they talk about, learn about what the UN is, learn about how the OAS differs from other international organizations, how it is a more capitalist organization than, I can't remember the other one. Is it CELAC or whatever is another one they're trying to form, an international organization in South America. But the whole point is I wanted to understand, how does the imperialist system work so that I could differentiate for myself, where are the valid human rights concerns at, and where are they using these valid human rights concerns to commit more human rights violations? Because sanctions deprive people of food, deprive people of medicine. Would people in North Korea be suffering as much as they are today if they weren't completely blockaded from the entire world? I don't think they would. I think they would look much more like a normal government if they were not deeply crippled with debt. And so I wanted to know, how are other countries operating, so that I could help free them from U.S. imperialism, so that at least I want us to get to the point where the U.S. has an opinion at the UN, the U.S. has an opinion on human rights, but we are not coercing anybody. If we're going to get something to happen, it has to be at a UN resolution. It has to be multilateral. The whole world has to be engaged in the discussion. But what we see is that you have the U.S. and Europe in one block. You have the global South basically universally against it. You always see, when you see like regime change in Venezuela, it's like 50 countries support it, and it's the US and Europe, basically. And then you see China and Russia. If you actually read what they say, they have valid counter arguments. Like the whole border situation right now between Belarus and Poland. You see the EU, a lot of people in the EU are talking about, oh, this is just Vladimir Putin doing a subtle warfare on us by sending refugees to our border. And it's like, no, these refugees want to go to Germany. They are going through Belarus because it's simpler to go through Belarus. And then when you listen to what Russia says, they have a valid reason to say the EU is not responding to the immigration crisis properly. They're basically screwing over the refugees. They don't have a clear plan on it because the EU doesn't have a clear plan on refugees. And if people knew the real global politics, if people could actually hear what Russia says and hear what China says and hear what Nicaragua says, I don't think we would be as supportive of wars. We would be more supportive of diplomacy.
And who created those immigrants? Who created those immigrants?
Our wars.
Those are immigrants from wars from the from the West, from Great Britain, France, United States. We bombed the shit out of Libya and destabilized it. We amped up a civil war in Syria. Those are our immigrants we created on top of things. And that's something that we talk about all the time. When I go home and I talk to my mom, who's a big Trumper, and her friends, she lives in this older community. They got a few bucks, you know what I'm saying? They're 90% of them supported Donald Trump and stuff like that. And when we talk about the crisis at the border, it's always like, well, they shouldn't be able to come over here and stuff like that, take advantage of everything we got. They're just coming here looking for a better life and they're taking advantage of it. I'm like, well, why are they coming here? Well, I guess their country's destabilized and it's kind of a shithole, like Donald Trump says. Well, why is it a shithole? I don't know. Well, we have 78 bases in the global south. 78 bases in the global south. Why is that? We are creating the problem. That's why I'm okay with everybody coming here, because we destabilized that country. And if you want a wall, you want to build a grand wall and stuff like that, I'll give you the fucking wall. But do me a favor. Close the 78 bases, get out of these people's business, and you won't see them migrate here like crazy because they won't be so destabilized, because we're supporting these psychos, paramilitary groups that keep the country destabilized so we can go in there and rape the resources, force the IMF and our monetary system on there so they're in debt to us. If we would stop that behavior, we wouldn't have that issue of immigration all over the goddamn world like they do have in Belarus now from our problems we created in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. They always use their geopolitical boogeyman to conceal the valid arguments about themselves. And that's why I wish we had more media that could actually talk about these things, because our media is all US-centric. It's only telling you things from the American point of view. You don't hear Vladimir Putin in his own words. You don't hear Lukashenko in his own words. And again, there are valid human rights concerns there. The Communist Party of Russia has concerns about Putin. But at the same time, like, they don't want us to destabilize their country. They don't want us overthrowing their governments. Nobody does. And so any last words about the Nicaraguan election security in America, because we're a little over an hour now, I'm about to go soon, but any last words about anything we've talked about today? Good conversation.
Well, the last thing I want to point out is the third phase of our election too is their tabulation machines we have here in America. You know, everybody says, what's the first change? The number one change you would make pasta Jardula to the election system is I would throw the corporations out. We have 99% of the tabulation machines are owned by 3 companies: Dominion, ES&S, and Smartmatic, which runs the HART program. Those tabulation machines have what's called proprietary software. In other words, we can't even open up the hood and look into it. So we call it black box voting. What goes in might not be the count of what coming out that actually went in. So that's something else we have to eliminate over there as well. And just pointing to what Nicaragua did, they have something where it's cast, it's counted in that same room. And that solidifies the chain of custody, because now you don't take it outside that room. And if the ballot is counted in the same place it's cast, that secures a lot of the elections. So what we saw in Nicaragua, and from what I heard, Venezuela is even better. I want to go take a look at that system eventually one time. We weren't able to get there today, but maybe we'll get there next year.
I actually know somebody who's there now.
What's that?
I know somebody who's there now. What's his name? Alex Suarez. I think he's there observing the elections next month.
There's a lot of people there.
You can hear about it. He'll talk about it a little, but go on.
Saskatchewan News there, the video clip you played. Camilla, she's there. Terry Masterson, she's awesome. And you guys got to go to Code Pink YouTube and watch what the fuck is going on in Latin America. That's Terry Masterson. She's awesome. We met her. We met some amazing people there too as well. There's a lot of people down there right now in Venezuela checking it out. And she told me the shelves are now full. There's traffic on the street, which means there's gas. There is inflation that hit there. And she said she had to pay $28 for a cheeseburger. But things are getting better over there. All the shelves are filled with Iranian and Chinese products because of the sanctions they're dealing with. But that's something we have to fix. And they're supposedly the staple. So whatever you hear about Venezuela trying to cheat elections, just throw it out the window. Because that's the thing they use, Kobe, as a consent for the imperialism. Oh, their elections were unfair. They eliminated their competition. They rigged it. It's a dictator. That's bullshit. These countries are leading the way when it comes to the elections, and Americans need to take their head out of their ass, especially the left, and start paying attention to these elections. And don't be concerned with the results. Be concerned with the process. The fact that everybody had TDS, they allowed for this fugazi election system to happen without even repairing the framework. And the thing is, I'll say this to them now, and I'll say it to them again and again and again down the road. If we don't fix the election system, it's your grassroots candidates that will always get screwed, because they didn't just do it to Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. They do it to all the grassroots candidates as well. Look at what happened with Nina Turner. Nobody looked under the hood. These elections should be transparent, accessible, publicly verified, and trackable so we can audit these situations, because it's the most sacred thing we can do. If we want the will of the people to be forward and to move forward and be that, we need to fix these systems right away, and we need to fix them. We need to wipe the board clean. We got to make sure they're fair. And if we do that, we'll fix so many things within our world, so many things within our economy, so many things within the state. It's really what we need. We need election revolution now.
Hell yeah. That was great. That was a great thing to end on there. This is a good conversation. I feel like I learned a lot from this. Like, these are the conversations we need to be having. You know, people need to, it's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to have strong disagreements. It's okay to have some people you don't want to talk to and some people you do want to talk to. But I think that it's so important that we don't just stay in our own echo chamber, that we do talk to people of different ideologies, because you might find that somebody of a completely different ideology is correct on something that somebody of your own ideology is incorrect on. And if we can work together on these single issues, again, you could stay in your political camp, you could stay in your political faction at the end of the day, but if we can talk across these differences, something like election security influences all of us. Our democracy is about everybody. And so I just think that we need to talk across these differences and just figure it all out. But thank you so much for coming on today. We'll have to do it again soon. Next time you guys go to an election, let me know. I'd love to hear about it again.
Kobe, I just want to say too as well, I'm Team Kobe. I think you're doing an amazing job. I want you to continue doing this. This was a fascinating conversation for me. I love where your head's at. I love your ideology. I love the fact that you're pushing back against cancel culture. That last statement you said, cancel culture is a weapon of the elites. It keeps us divided. It keeps discourse down. You know, that's why I'm such a First Amendment absolutist, because we need to have these conversations, and we need to stop demonizing people who think differently than us. I can tell you this much. I consider myself a Latin American leftist now. You know what I'm saying? Because it's different. It's all about economics. It's all about resources. It's all about infrastructure. In fact, the left in Nicaragua, the socialists, the Sandinistas, they're very much socially conservative. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. They're not there yet on gay marriage. They're not going to legalize marijuana. They don't even want to talk about trans rights and stuff like that. They actually align with a lot of the patriots and the conservatives in America. But when it comes to their economics, they're left. And cancel culture is a weapon of the elites. Like I said, you're pushing back against that. Keep doing what you're doing. Anytime you want us on, brother, I am there for you. I'm really proud of what you're doing. And I think we need to have more shows like this. So keep kicking ass. And anytime we can reach out and come on your show and talk about elections, we will do so, brother. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Thank you so much, man. And so this is the end of our episode today of the Pro Peace Report. Until next time.